Hello, everyone, and welcome back to This Week in Tech. This is episode 27. Wow. Time flies when you're having fun. I'm Hyoun Park from Amalgam Insights, joined as always by Charlie Araujo. And where are you today?
I'm home, but I was actually at the New York Stock Exchange earlier today. Very exciting for the
Fancy.
first. Yeah, that's why they had it. In fact, I for the first time, and I can't tell you how long I didn't wear jeans. Actually, they apparently I could have gotten away with it, but they strongly discourage jeans. Very fascinating. We won't go into it, but I was there with Juniper Networks, who we'll talk about a little bit later in the show.
Yeah.
They were ringing the opening bell, and it was just an opportunity to actually be on the floor during the ringing of the bell. That was a lot of fun, and actually got a little bit of the history lesson of stuff that, despite living here in New York for the last 7 years, I did not know, and it was super fascinating. So, but yeah, that's why I'm dressed up.
Yeah. It's like, you're practically dressed to the nines by tech standards.
I've got colors. Oh my gosh.
Yes. But it's, you know, despite being in the dog days of summer, it feels like there are still some interesting things that are happening in tech that people need to be aware of, especially those of us who work with IT offices, the CIO office, those of us figuring out tech strategy. And I think the biggest one that has been coming up for me in the past couple of weeks is the union of government and tech, and where we are trying to figure out what to do with AI. Of course, everybody cares about AI, right? And for the most part, we've seen the European Union take the lead on how to set rules about this, but we're starting to see a little effort happen here here in California, as we like making laws. We like enforcing things and governing things. We've been looking at this story for a bit now, Charlie, on how it looks like California is going to actually put an effort out into governing AI models.
Yeah, so I think it's probably useful for you to go through and summarize so people know what we're talking about if they haven't been following this. But I think the very first thing, just off the cuff, is to me the very very big red warning sign. So this is California SB 1047. It's just, I think, just cleared the assembly. It's waiting for California Senate approval before it goes to the governor's office to be signed. Still a lot, questions if it's going to get through that level. But to me, the very big warning sign is, why is California, why is the state passing this? You talked about the EU, which is, the other end of the spectrum, an entire collection of countries. We've talked in the past here about some of the efforts within the federal government, and here we have the state attempting to regulate something that by its very definition extends outside of the walls of the state. And I think that's going to be part of the foundation. But maybe we to cue it up, because you have if you don't know about Hyoun, he has a background that sort of intersects the exact space that this does between politics and technology. So I think you're a great person to sort of cue up what this is, and then we can dive into whether or not it makes any sense.
Yeah, it's funny. I spent about the first decade of my career doing a lot of stuff in politics. I've been a political treasurer and I've worked in aspects of policy. And then I came into tech. And honestly, tech people tend to not like government. Government people don't tend to like tech. And neither side really understands the other side, which makes it really fascinating whenever they try to make some sort of law that goes into tech. But in this case, we've got SB 1047, Senate Bill 1047 in California, which is trying fundamentally to figure out how to manage AI models and how to make sure that AI models that cause big cyber attacks or are involved with large amounts of money that in terms of damages, it provides some sort of liability to somebody associated with that AI. The basic idea is, don't cyber attack people and take hundreds of dollars away. But of course, the devil starts being in the details, because when you think about the AI model, you have to start figuring out, well, who made the model, who's responsible for the model, versus who actually did the attack, and is the attack based on kind of commoditized technology, or is it based on something special about the model itself, right? So right now, California is starting to take this approach that basically says any large AI model, something that takes up $10 million or more of development, is going to be subject to these laws and punishments and possible damages associated with attacks. Of course, when you think about this as a startup company working in AI, you might immediately think, well, I just spent $10 million on my model, and now what's done with it might be out of my control. And, that's a challenge. On the other hand, California is probably really looking out at Microsoft, Google, Meta, Facebook. Like those are the companies that California always wants to actually manage. So, we're seeing all of these battles starting to come into place about what will be in the bill and what won't be in the bill, for the simple reason that from a political perspective, this is very popular. Nobody wants to be on the side of saying, yeah, AI should go unmanaged. Everybody wants to put some sort of handcuffs or restraints on AI. So regardless of what tech thinks, this is going to pass, and we're starting to try to figure out what is actually going to be in this bill at the end of the day.
Well, so I think there's a couple things. I am not quite as sure as you are that it's going to pass, or perhaps that it will pass because we need the politicians need some kind of air cover, but it's going to be significantly watered down. There's already an interesting bedfellows, a collection of both Democrat and Republican federal legislators, so senators and Congress people, that are calling on the state not to pass this bill. Lots and lots of concern, both, as I mentioned, about jurisdiction, but also just the sense that it's way too early, because it's important to note that all of this stuff that this bill is attempting to regulate, none of it has happened yet. We've not had any situation that would yet be subject to this bill, at least that I'm aware of. And there's all kinds of stipulations in it right now that I think are just so much overreach. First of all, right, it's so not only do you have the $10 million threshold of some harm, but you have the $100 million threshold that if you invest in it, at least in what I've seen, I don't know what the other limits are. There's a couple of different triggers, but if you pass these triggers, then you have to effectively register your model, and that without any clarity on exactly how, if the state deems it's unsafe, then they would restrict it from being used. And it's just like, how is this possibly going to happen? And if it's only within the confines of the jurisdiction of the state, well, what does that even mean? So what if does that mean, that people who are logging in with an IP address coming out of the state of California maybe just can't get access because OpenAI decides, well, they'd have to move out of the state first, but they decide that they aren't going to let anyone from California use their models, right? That's not good for Californians. That's not good for anything. It represents a risk of stifling innovation. So, it's I feel like I'm beating the same old drum here, but it's not that I'm opposed to oversight. In fact, I think we need smart oversight. I don't think this is the forum, and I think so far the approaches they're taking are going to do nothing but hurt California in terms of their competitiveness and potentially threaten the innovation cycles of these companies that are moving quickly. And it comes back down to the core root of this, that at the end of the day, it's in my opinion not the maker of the tool, a tool like this that can clearly be used for good and evil. Mm-hmm. It's the person who's wielding that tool that should be held accountable. And this is an age-old battle we've been fighting around the world in this country, right? Whether it's about guns or other things, about who should be held responsible. And unless these companies are shown to be abusing that, knowingly putting something out and encouraging people to use it in a nefarious manner, that I think crosses the line. But otherwise, they're tool makers. And so I don't know exactly what the line is, and I think that's the hard part. And I get that politicians are trying to get in front of this, and I appreciate that they're trying to get in front of this, but I do not think this is a good bill at all.
Yeah, I tend to think about when in technology something bad happens, like probably the most famous attack that happens on a regular basis is your standard DDoS, your distributed denial of service. This is not a complicated concept. This is just, we're just going to hit your entrance point, a billion times and overwhelm it. It's just kind of a brute force approach. You can do it with a variety of different types of tools. And the tool in question doesn't really, define the damage that is done. The damage just happens because there's only so many ways to control input and output out of a computer, and uh, and honestly, the complexity of the AI honestly doesn't have that much to do with how much damage is going to happen at the end of the day. And I find that a lot of the cyber damage that we're looking at is either due to that DDoS type approach or basic user and password mismanagement. And these things are not really dependent on the complexity of the AI to determine what kind of damage happens. It's the user and the target that really define how much damage is happening at the end of the day. Because as complex as tech can be, this is an area that's actually not super complex from a conceptual perspective. Like the damages that happen from a security perspective tend to be simple in a conceptual nature in a way that AI complexity isn't going to really make that much of a difference. I don't think.
Yeah, and I mean, and look at, I think there's going to be some low hanging fruit. There's going to be some stuff that is easier to regulate, about saying, hey, we shouldn't allow these models to, drum up the way how to make an atomic weapon or something, right? I mean, or weapons of mass destruction in other ways, simple things like that. I think that those are simple controls. And I think those are reasonable, right? That we're going to have a reasonable expectation, and I think that's what's currently the terminology in the bill is reasonable care. Okay, fine, that's fair. I think what's really hard is the truly nefarious uses of AI are ways that are sort of, to your point, are super simple, right? I mean, I was just talking to um, my wife. We're in the process of getting her EU citizenship, and so we're getting a bunch of marriage certificates and birth certificates from family and what have you. And she was asking, well, why is this protected? Because you have to have like authority, right? You have to have some provenance to be able to get it. I said, because that is a gold mine for social engineering. I take that sort of data and I feed it into a model, and suddenly and now we could even, like, I could replicate, if I get a voice friend, I can replicate somebody's voice and now feed in all this information about cousin Joe, and they got married at this church. And it's like, suddenly this information is incredibly valuable to do it. Well, there's no way you're going to shut it, sort of killing AI. You're not going to stop that, right? That is a perfectly, because there's that exact scenario have a completely innocent use case. And that's what most of the real issues that we're going to have. I mean, I guarantee, in fact, I'm sure we already are getting a whole bunch of our spam is now AI generated. Okay, whoop-de-doo. How are we going to stop it? Right. And so I appreciate the issue. I appreciate the challenge. And I think the last thing, we've talked about this a lot. We're at the very beginning. We're at the beginning of this whole process. And so most of the real issues we still don't even understand.
Right. I feel like even with some of the more complex use cases that come in, like the deep fakes that can happen where we might be able to swap faces and voices and whatever. Sure. That is definitely something to be scared of. But the same technology that does that is providing our current Snap and Zoom, and Google, masks that we use in consumer technology all the time. Kids are already playing with this stuff. It provides the voice recognition that we use for a bunch of other technologies, such as voice to text or some of the security tools that we use already. Like all of these things that we want to ban because they can be used maliciously are already often being used either in a harmless or in a useful way. And those consumer uses aren't going to go away just because we want to control the malicious aspects.
Yeah, and again, I look at this. The bill is calling for the creation of what they're calling the Board of Frontier Models, which is going to be located inside what an existing government operations agency. So you can already just smell the stink of bureaucracy, and it's going to be really questionable. Are they going to get people that are truly qualified to make any of these assessments on there? How is that? So as I've said probably 100 times on this podcast, every time we talk about the regulatory aspects of this, I don't have answers. I get it's hard. I'm not trying to be, critical for the sake of being critical. My criticism is that I feel like this is a bunch of politicians trying to read the tea leaves, and we're seeing an upswell and an increase in hesitancy and concern around AI in the general consumer population. in the general constituencies that these politicians answer to, and they're trying to show that they're acting on that. And I think to me, I think what's most likely going to happen is they're going to get continued pressure. There's going to be a lot of concern. It's going to get watered down, and it's going to be this, in the end, meaningless piece of legislation. And so, all right, whatever. But I guess we'll see.
Yeah, my bet is that there will be some very strict rules and damage limits put into place where maybe companies can be held liable for hundreds of millions, billions of dollars. But what's going to happen in practice is that the standards are going to be put up to some board, which is going to take 5 years to figure out simply what they're going to be able to even do. And by then, it's all too late. But I'm intellectually curious about how this proposed board of frontier models plans to actually govern models when we know that the benchmarks for these models are changing on a weekly, sometimes a daily basis. There are these leaderboards of performance of these models, and we see them. We don't cover it every week just because it would be impossible to cover this horse race. But we're seeing different models show up as the top models for all sorts of different use cases on a daily, every other day, weekly basis at a rate that, by the time you could even figure out whether it should be governed, it's too late. Like something else has already popped up that's going to
Oh, yeah.
do the job even better.
And we've talked about this before. This is not just going to impact the Microsofts and the Metas and the Googles of the world. $10 million is a very low threshold for any large enterprise that is looking at building a model. So this is going to, so the reason I think that is relevant to the CIO, you're a CIO of a large enterprise, this matters to you. If you're based in California, again, they haven't talked really about what the limits are, but conceptually, if you have customers, if anybody who interacts with your organization in California, which basically means everybody, you may be subject to this. And so I think, that's why I think in the end, it's going to get significantly watered down. The one part that was somewhat surprising, there's obviously pushback from the major AI companies. And other major tech companies. There hasn't yet been public pushback, at least that I've seen, from any of the major non-AI enterprise companies. But I mostly think that's just because they haven't really woken up yet to the fact that this will, in fact, impact them, or at least could. So, but to your point, I on the one hand, I still think, this is so stupid and doesn't make any sense. On the other hand, it's like, it's not worth that much time, because to your point, I think by the time they get this all figured out, it's all going to have changed anyway. And even the tech companies themselves are having trouble keeping up, as evidenced by, if you're okay moving on to another piece of news that came out, which was on one hand completely predictable, on the other hand, or sort of predictable, and completely shocking on another. And that is that AMD made another acquisition, this time of a company called ZT Systems, for I think it was $5.5 billion. And they're a company that most people, including me, had never heard of. Or I guess it's 4.9 billion roughly. And this is a company that basically is in the business of manufacturing servers and data center hardware and doing design around it. And they're very like a inside baseball sort of company. But what is shocking about this news, so we where we started, we talked about the fact that tech companies are trying to figure this out, right? So obviously AMD is in a heated battle with NVIDIA, trying to kind of remain relevant and be a hey, we're here to player when it comes to these AI chips. So they've been making lots of acquisitions, and we've talked in the past about there's a software as a major component. Well, what is interesting with this one is that this is, for the way the Wall Street Journal puts it. Let's see, did they write it in their headline? No, I guess not. It was somebody else, as I said, that had it, but basically that it was AMD's $5 billion acquihire, right? Because they have announced that they're going to divest themselves of the manufacturing business, of the actual part that produces something, and just keeping, I think they said, 1,000 really smart engineers, right, that know data center design and server design, because this is so intrinsic to the ability to operationalize AI. And so it is just absolutely fascinating that a company would make a $5 billion investment just to get a collection of really smart people. And so it just speaks to what we were just talking about, that this stuff is moving so fast, that it's changing so quickly, that the regulatory boards I just don't think have a fighting. They can't keep up with social, and social didn't move anywhere near this fast, So, but I'm curious, just leaving all that side of it, aside, what you thought of this whole AMD acquisition.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting that to see how the chip companies are starting to finally verticalize and become systems companies. Of course, NVIDIA's talk around software has been pretty obvious over the past couple of years as well. But AMD basically bought ZT Systems, a data center infrastructure company, because they want to build systems and buildings and all sorts of things, above the chip level. And to do that, they needed a company that had experience in building all of these systems. And apparently, they don't care about ZT systems themselves, since they are divesting the entire data center infrastructure manufacturing business, which is whatever, 5 billion, 6 billion, $7 billion a year. They're happy to just get rid of that. And they'll probably make some money when they spin that off as well, but it's probably a low margin business. But what they really wanted was these smart people who could figure out systems design, just to build stuff around the AMD chip. At one time, on the one hand, I feel like it's really smart. On the other hand, I feel like, wow, like it seems like such an extravagant thing to do.
Well, it also speaks. So we'll talk in a second. I was at that Juniper event today, and I think this is connected. But it also speaks to the fact that what's the old saying? All that is new is once old, or something like that, right? Everything that's new was old, whatever. But we have these cycles repeat. So at the very dawn of everything that we do now, we had these horizontally and vertically integrated closed systems, right? The IBM ecosystem, and then there were obviously other competitors that eventually came around. But it was this whole, because the premise was, as the purchasers, the user of these systems, you didn't have anywhere near the expertise to actually execute and operate any of these. So they basically delivered this sort of turnkey thing, and the old is it bring up a truck and they put the whole thing in. And then we had the whole distributed computing sort of thing, and everything broke apart. And suddenly it was on the enterprise to deal with all of it. And that worked for a while because it was relatively simple. And what we're seeing now is that the workloads have become so critical and so intensive that these companies are saying we need to sort of go back to this, maybe not closed architecture, but where we need to own the stack, because it requires a high level of expertise to integrate all of us together in a way that you can get these performance characteristics that you need. And so I think that's what you're seeing start to play out with this. And I think we clearly are seeing NVIDIA go the same way. I think we're going to see Intel moving in the same direction. It's just sort of where this is happening, because ironically enough, hardware is again relevant and it's important. And so that leads into the Juniper conversation. So Juniper, I think it was today, announced what they're calling their blueprint for accelerating AI native network platform adoption. The announcement today actually isn't the important part of this, in my opinion. Juniper, if you don't know them, they basically make wireless access points, networking equipment. They are effectively a competitor with Cisco. It's about as unsexy of a business as you can get. The interesting thing about being focused on the network, of course, is even with the rise of cloud, every enterprise still needs to own their network, right? They still have to be able to connect. And so it has been a little bit more stable from that standpoint. But what I think is really interesting is they have a go-to-market story about experience first, this idea that it's all about focusing not on is the network up, but are we delivering the experience that we want to, and to what degree is our transport medium, our network, contributing or not to that. And now this idea of they're calling it AI native, and their premise, and I think there's a little bit of a hand waving here, but their fundamental premise is that they took a very deliberate approach to the data that they generate out of their network devices that they deploy. And because they start with better data, they can therefore deploy internal or embedded AI models on top of it to create at least something close to self-remediating, self-managing network environments, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's what they're trying to go for. And so this what they announced today was maybe a hint that people aren't getting it, so they're trying to accelerate deployments. But it was still really, really interesting, kind of going back to what we were talking about, that they are spending a lot more time. They have a cloud business now where all the entire management plane sits in what they call their Mist cloud. They have a subscription model with that. They have software. So they announced that 22% of their revenue is software. Approximately a little under 10% of their revenue is now ARR based. Those are
Mhm.
staggering numbers, in my opinion, for a hardware company. And so I think it again speaks to this fact that hardware is becoming relevant, and this sort of integrated approach is important because we are continually fighting with how do we optimize across this, and that optimization is requiring ever more higher levels of expertise to do, and it's getting harder and harder for the enterprise to manage all of that, and so therefore we're turning to people that can do that full stack integration. And I think it's really fascinating to just sort of see, and not to be lost in all of this is, I think part of that success is why they are now being acquired by HPE for, I think it was $14 billion or something.
Mhm.
So lots of interesting moves.
Yeah, HPE, of course, has been doing well selling hardware as a service through their uh, and basically it is pushing their business right now. So they know that it is hard to keep up with hardware. Fundamentally, if you have private cloud or on-prem capabilities, their GreenLake capabilities are able to make sure that companies can continue to upgrade their hardware over time and just pay their subscription fee. And HPE has been delivering on that really well. So obviously that has been an important trend. But I feel that also there's this thing about networking that gets overlooked in the AI world. We know storage, compute, network. Those are the three big buckets. And we talk all the time about storage and the cloud storage for AI. We talk all about compute, obviously, with the models. We spend very little time talking about networking and the needs to provide duplicate data, to deliver data to wherever it goes, to have the right data in each geographic area that you need to be. That delivery of data gets underlooked, and I think that's going to be a bigger deal, especially since generative AI makes it so easy to create data intensive outputs, including audio, video, pictures, things that are going to increase the amount of transport that are necessary, as well as the amount of documentation and governance that are necessary in enterprises. Every time you create something that is OpenAI-ish in a business setting, you probably have to store that, right? Because you have records and all sorts of governance issues. So I think this networking issue is going to come up to a greater extent, and then the need to be able to uh, keep track of what happens from a networking perspective and keep track of that performance is going to be important as well. So I think we're seeing a bit of calm before the storm, where companies that are investing right now in high performance networking are going to actually see an advantage because that capacity is going to get used up quickly, sometime in the next couple of years, as AI for companies where AI takes off.
Well, and I think what we talked in the last few weeks a lot about this idea of operationalizing AI, and that's where this is going to start to really matter. It's one thing if I'm using Copilot. If the Copilot drags on for a few minutes, it's really hard to say. Is it the model? Is it the network? What is it? But when we start operationalizing this and putting this into our production workflows that are particularly those that are engaging a customer in some way, and we're leveraging AI of any form, whether it's Gen AI, predictive AI, and feeding it into it, that transport, hey, we are going to flood it. It is absolutely going to get overrun because of the intense levels of inference that has to happen, and what have you. And it just creates a higher volume, right? And so I think this is going to become really critical. In fact, I want to give props to them. As someone who helps tech companies with messaging, I appreciate when someone is nailing their messaging, and they're absolutely nailing it. I mean, so not only this experience first approach where they're taking the network that sounds mundane and putting it in the context of the business context of the experience you're delivering to customers, employees, but then they specifically talk about this within the context of their AI native, that they're saying it's AI for networking, i.e., how can we use AI to build a more robust and stable network? But then networking for AI, which is how do you have a robust network infrastructure to support these AI workloads? And so, I mean, they just have this super tight story about how this all hangs together and fits. And I just always love to see that. And it's like a few other rarefied companies that their customers in the room we're clearly on board with it, and we're parroting it back and saying it. And when you see companies hitting that spot, that puts them in a really good space. And so my only concern, of course, for them is the acquisition of HPE, which of course is a very old school sort of company, if that deflates some of that over the long haul. But overall, it was really good to see him, and it was really interesting.
Excellent. Yeah, I honestly haven't talked to Juniper in a long time. More because of how network has been perceived in the CIO office than anything else. Nothing against networking. I love networking. I do a lot of work on the telecom and network expense side, but when it comes to the technology side, it gets underlooked, and it's not fair, but it is kind of true.
Well,
uh,
speaking of underlooking, I suppose, or how you want to look at it, we had a mystery. Was it last week when we had this mystery with SAP about
yes.
some of these?
They're just
So, but
tossing off executives left and right.
but you were sleuthing around and you found the answer. I guess it wasn't hard that we did a big press release, but you found at least part of the answer, right?
Right. So apparently, we've at least figured out where one of these executives are going. So we saw that Nice Systems, which has been run for a long time, couple decades, by the same CEO. Apparently it's time to retire, and Nice has been looking for new CEO. So they are looking at Scott Russell, who just left SAP. Seems like a solid choice. Honestly, I think there's been a mixed bag with SAP executives going into other companies as CEOs, quite frankly. But I would say that SAP salespeople tend to understand solution selling. I give them that. Like, that it might not be the absolute right fit for everything, but SAP salespeople definitely understand solution selling. And I think for that reason, it'll be a good fit. We've seen that sales focused executives from SAP as compared to the product facing ones, or kind of like the old head GMs, have been successful in working at other companies. I think of Steve Lucas as an example. Very charismatic. He did a great job at Marketo. Now he's at Boomi. Each company he's been to, he made changes, and I see Scott Russell being the same type of executive. So now we've figured out where their CRO went. Now to figure out where their CMO is going.
So I will defer to you on it. You follow the execs much better and much more closely than I do. I do not know Scott Russell. I do know what I'm always slightly hesitant of a CRO or a head of sales taking on a CEO role unless that company's really only issue was their sales motions, right? If that's really where the focus is. And I'm not sure that's really the case with Nice. I feel like Nice has lots of opportunities and lots of challenges when it comes to their overall positioning, where they're playing. I think they're playing in too many spaces. I think that, all of those sort of challenges. And so this, I think and like I said, I don't know the man. So, this, maybe it's a great stretch opportunity. He's going to rise to the occasion, but I think Nice needs more than just a rekindled sales effort. And so it'll be interesting to see if he's able to pull that off.
Yeah,
That said, I think Nice needs change. So that's good. The one piece that was interesting for me is that not effective until January 1st. And it's like, maybe I'm just an impatient person, but it's like, why are we waiting 4 months?
well, I figure that Nice wants to do a handoff, and figure this out. I actually agree. I don't think Nice fundamentally needs to change its sales right now. They are running on all cylinders. They're growing quickly. They're profitable. They're everything that you want a company to be. Their problem is not that they are struggling to sell their product right now, or that they don't have a product that is good from a contact center and customer experience perspective. They have bigger strategy issues of good problems to have, like when you're growing 20+% a year, like what are we going to take on next? That's a good problem to have.
Yeah, and in that regard, I think maybe you're right. I think having someone come from a bigger company that clearly played in a bigger pond, that maybe is good. So I wish them all the best. I've been a fan of Nice for a long time. I have found that their overall positioning in the market has been a little confusing and not as tight, and not having that tripartite vision. And ironically, I feel like SAP has historically has done a pretty good job with a lot of those parts. Just hasn't always executed on it. So I guess we'll see how that one plays out. But at least one part of the mystery solved. So anyway, on to another topic, and this one I think is quite fascinating, and I'm really curious on your take on it because you know more about the space than I do. But Cockroach Labs, which is, I guess, technically a formerly open source company. I think they technically moved away from
Yes.
open source, at least in full, 4 or 5 years ago. But they've been, as many open source companies, that this is not a slam on Cockroach at all. I think, first of all, whoever named them, I just don't get that name. But
Oh, it's a
you
great
can't
name.
kill it, I
We'll get
guess,
into
is okay. You can tell me, but maybe it's because I live in New York and I just have the complete visceral hate of cockroaches. But as many companies have attempted to monetize from an open source model, I think they've struggled a little bit, and so they have this new approach, which is fascinating. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm understanding this right, basically they're saying if you have more than $10 million in annual revenue, now you have to pay for it. And I'm not sure how they validate that, or if that's just the honor system or what. And it's certainly a unique, at least I haven't heard of anyone taking that sort of an approach, because under 10 million is free, right? That's like, I've heard people like stepstones, right? If based on total revenue or whatever, but not where the bottom rung is free. And then this other. So what's your take? Is this a smart move? Do you know more about how this is going to work out?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I've been a fan of Cockroach for a few years now. It is basically you pick Cockroach Labs to do one thing. You want to scale out a database and never have to worry that it's going to break. That's why it's Cockroach Labs. You can step on it, you can try to kill it, you can try to overwhelm it all you want, and it'll just keep on going. Like, it is fantastic from that perspective. It's just a database that works, and you don't have to worry about the challenges of how hard is this to manage or administrate, the same way that you would have to say with something like Oracle, which obviously is much more complex of a product in some respects. But Cockroach Labs just works. Cockroach works, DB. But as for the pricing itself, I think they've struggled to figure out how to translate that value into money. So their latest approach is now saying, okay, we're only, because they want the startup business, and frankly, they want the startup businesses to just grow. That's the entire reason that Cockroach exists in the first place, because you needed this cheap database that anybody could start using that could help you grow to X amount. But they're deciding that unless you are over 10 million in revenue, we're not going to charge you. And then after 10 million, we're going to charge you based on the number of CPUs you're using, so that we can price based on that scale out capability that we are fantastic at. So that concept is not a bad one. I still struggle with how this actual monetization is going to go. It does feel like it's an honor system, and frankly, there's no real reason that most companies would have honor when it comes to their IT spend. So I find that part interesting. Maybe Cockroach has a bunch of clients that they've already identified that have said that they would be willing to pay. And if that's the case, more power to them. I just find it seems very optimistic from a business practice perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I don't understand is why not just have a paid model. I guess I hear what you're saying as far as they want the early stage startups, and 10 million is a pretty low threshold, right? You're a pretty young startup before when you're still crossing 10 million. So maybe that part makes sense, but I guess unless you have, the way most organizations do it is it's like, oh, you can use this on X number of CPUs, right? And that's the cap, and it's much more easier to control. But I don't know. I mean, and to me, it's a great experiment. They're clearly, one thing that has been true about them from the beginning is that they're very committed to the space. They're committed to the startup community. They're committed to the open source community. And so from that context, this ethos makes sense. And so I hope it works for them. I hope it, it'll be very curious to see how this all plays out. Um, and if it does, we could see others follow suit. So
Yeah, I feel like one of the big
I'm,
struggles with open source in general is that there tends to be only one real way to monetize, which is through services like Red Hat does. But what happens if you create a great open source product that also doesn't require a huge amount of maintenance? Because you did such a great job of designing it in the first place. That's the problem that Cockroach is in right now. They want to do the right thing, but obviously they have to literally pay their bills.
yeah, I mean, it's either services or support, and to your point, they've sort of, they designed too good of a product. It doesn't take a whole lot of services, doesn't take a whole lot of support. It just runs, and that's great for them, but it's bad for them. And so,
Mhm.
speaking of bad for you, though, let's talk about so the opposite of them. They have done such a great job. They are almost a victim of their own success in that. And then we'll just talk about a victim of your own failure. And
Sure.
that is you shared this with me. Palo, where was this at? Palo
Oh
Alto
no.
was at what was
Black
it, a
Hat.
Black Hat?
Yes.
And they decided to bring back booth babes in the worst possible way. And I'm looking at this picture, and it took me a minute. I literally thought these were like mannequins, but
Mhm.
it's two women in what appear to be like cocktail dresses wearing lampshades on their head with Palo Alto logo stamped on it. And I mean, it does not take a whole lot of imagination to figure out what some of the comments were. Somebody posted on LinkedIn about, what the hell, Palo Alto Networks, is this 1960? Another
Yes.
said, is this what we are? We're still just object. I forgot what I'm trying to find the quote now, but we're nothing more than props to you. I mean, it just, I'm always amazed by these sort of missteps because
Hmm.
it's like, how did you think this was going to go?
Yes. I will say that I feel like one of the areas where we have made progress in tech in my 20 years in tech is that we have mostly gotten rid of the booth babe. The only booth babe I want to see at a booth is the one who can demo the solution for me. That's the babe to me, whether it's male or female. Like that's the extent of what I'm looking for on the demo floor. But the fact that anybody thought
I
was
think you
this was
found
a
your
good
new calling.
idea.
Hey, we're going to have you work with all your clients, and part of your new service is that you'll be in their booth wearing a t-shirt that says, I'm your booth babe, baby, and then you'll do
Yeah,
their demos for them.
sure. I'm happy to do that. But I also feel like so obviously, not for I'm anti-objectification. I think they got what they deserve. But I also feel like when you're making a decision like this, you should be able to make a decision where you can defend this to like your mom and dad. Like if your mom and dad ask, "What do you do for a living?" and you're saying, "Yeah, I put women up, models up in cocktail dresses and put a lampshade on their heads that are branded with our company name." Yeah, that's not a good answer.
I'm trying to, somewhere in here, they quoted the rationale, and I'm trying to find it here because
I,
I can't figure out. I mean, the biggest thing about it, I mean, let alone, like you said, I mean, nobody has, scantily clad women that have nothing to do with your business in their booths anymore. We haven't had that for decades, right? Or at least a decade,
years,
decade and a
unfortunately,
half.
not decades.
And but it's been a long time. It's like, so that's the very first thing. And then sticking these lampshades on their heads, it just doesn't make any sense. And it says, I'm trying to find it where they said that what their rationale was, but I just can't figure it out. Um
Yeah, I think somebody just
yeah.
tried to be creative. The part that frustrates me a little bit is this is a nitpick here, but so the CEO obviously had to apologize after this big misstep, and the wording that he used said something about I'm glad you have not rushed to judge us and that we have kept your trust. Um, and honestly, like I feel like that's a little presumptuous that you're just assuming that people are all proactively going to forgive you, and especially when you don't have any steps uh, in your apology about what you actually did, other than we're going to try to do better. It's like
Yeah, I
Well,
mean, I would, and maybe this is stupid, and but I would love to at least say, hey, this is what we intended to mean by this, and we're really sorry that we completely misread it or whatever. But it's like I literally can't even come up with a reason, right? We know what Palo
mhm,
Alto Networks does. We know they're at Blackout, they're a security event. What in the world is having a woman with a lampshade? What can it possibly do? I
mhm.
mean, other than
Yes.
what be a novelty, which it just is, it is absolutely in this day and age boggling, mind boggling that they would go down that road. So I think there's going to be a fallout. Unfortunately, it's probably not much of one because these things always tend to blow over quickly. But it was just shocking, and definitely would not want to be the marketing team at Palo Alto right now.
Yes, but we are definitely, but as we are coming up into fall trade show season, there are going to be a lot of other big shows, whether it be, I don't know, Dreamforce, Amazon reInvent. Please, every company, take note.
I mean, the only part I'm sympathetic with them on it is that it is so hard to stand out at these events.
It
And
is.
so I get that people are trying to push the envelope and try to find ways to garner attention, but this is the wrong kind of attention, not what you want to be doing. And more than anything is that the whole reason, the boot bait thing, I mean, all the misogynistic and sexism stuff aside, right? At the end of the day, we've gone through this transition where enterprise buyers are trying to solve problems. They're trying to deliver value to their organizations. And that is truly the thing that
Mhm.
drives the conversation. And so having some whatever bizarre eye candy is not going to get there. Even if you get people into your booth, that's not going to be delivering the message that you need to deliver to compete in this market today. And so all the other stuff, which I'm not trying to minimize, but all the other stuff aside, it was misguided because it's not going to serve their end objectives of trying to drive revenue and value. So there was just nothing good about this.
Yes, couldn't agree more. And on that note, I think we're going to call it a week. Thanks everyone for joining us for yet another week of discussing the craziness that is happening in tech and AI and what the CIO office needs to think about it.